I'm General Mark Milley, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and in my 40 years of military service, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal, but nothing, nothing, prepared me for what I discovered in that hospital room at 3:47 a.m. The person trying to kill me wasn't wearing a uniform, wasn't carrying a weapon, they were wearing scrubs, and a stethoscope. What I'm about to tell you will change how you look at hospitals forever. This story nearly cost me everything, and it reveals a network so dangerous that even our most secure medical facilities aren't safe. 3 months ago, what should have been routine surgery, a minor procedure removing scar tissue from an old combat injury, standard stuff for someone who's spent decades in service. I checked into Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, the most secure medical facility in the country, the same place where presidents get treated. If anywhere should have been safe, it was there. But here's what I didn't know. What I'm about to reveal to you. Walter Reed had been infiltrated. Not by foreign agents, not by enemy spies, by something far more insidious, a network of medical professionals who had sold their souls to the highest bidder. Second night in recovery. I was drowsy from medication, drifting in and out of consciousness. That's when I heard voices in the hallway, to people talking in hushed tones, right outside my door. The general's vitals are strong, a woman's voice said. Better than expected for someone his age. That's a problem, came the reply. A man's voice I didn't recognize. The timeline has been moved up. It needs to happen within 48 hours.
What?
About the family visits tomorrow. Perfect cover. When emotions are high, when everyone's distracted. That's when we make our move. Now. You have to understand something about military training. We're taught to stay alert, even when we're vulnerable. Something about that conversation triggered every alarm bell. In my head, the tone, the clinical way they discussed lines, the mention of using family visits as cover, none of it sounded like normal medical staff conversation. I kept my eyes closed, listened as their footsteps moved away, but my mind was racing. Who were they talking about? What timeline? And why did it sound like they were planning something that needed to happen while families were visiting? The next morning, I started paying closer attention to the staff, really watching them. That's when I noticed Dr. Sarah Chen, my attending physician. Something about her behavior had changed overnight. She avoided direct eye contact, seemed nervous checking my charts, kept glancing at her phone. Behavior that was completely different from her confident demeanor the day before, during her morning rounds. I decided to test something. I mentioned that I was feeling much better, might be ready to go home earlier than planned. The relief that flashed across her face was unmistakable. She quickly agreed, suggested we could accelerate my discharge to that afternoon. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. The day before, she'd insisted I needed at least 3 more days of observation. Now she was eager to send me home. Military training teaches you to recognize when someone's motivations suddenly shift. Dr. Chen's had shifted dramatically. I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of going along with the early discharge, I told her I'd changed my mind, wanted to stay the full recommended time, said I was having some pain and wanted to be cautious. The disappointment in her eyes confirmed my suspicions. That afternoon, my family came to visit as scheduled. My wife Martha, my children, even some of my grandchildren. It should have been a happy, healing time, but I found myself watching the medical staff more than enjoying the visit. And that's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Nurse James Morrison, a man who'd been nothing but professional and caring for 2 days, was now acting completely differently. He kept finding reasons to enter my room during the family visit. Each time, he'd fidget with something near my foreline, adjust equipment in a way that seemed unnecessary, but it was his hands that gave him away. They were shaking. In 40 years of military service, I've learned to read people under pressure. Morrison was terrified, not nervous, not uncomfortable. Terrified, like a man who knew he was about to do something terrible. And couldn't back out. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but instead, I slipped out into the hallway. Years of military operations teach you how to move quietly, how to observe without being seen. What I witnessed next would haunt me for months. Morrison was at the nurse's station, drawing medication into a syringe, but he wasn't using normal procedures. No double checking with another nurse, no verification of dosages, no scanning of barcodes. He was working quickly, quietly, like someone who didn't want his actions documented. I watched as he labeled the syringe with my name and room number, Then I saw him do something that made my heart stop. He drew a second medication into the same syringe. 2 different drugs, mixed together, with no documentation of what he was doing. Asterisk, I slipped back into my room just as he was approaching. My family was still there, chatting and laughing, completely unaware that we were all about to witness ... an attempted murder. Morrison entered, with that same nervous energy, the syringe in his hand. "Time for your evening medication, General," he said, his voice just a little too casual. That's when I made the decision that saved my life. I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "You know what, James? I'd like Dr. Chen to review my medications before you administer anything. Could you call her in here, please?" The color drained from his face. "Oh, that's not necessary, sir. This is just your standard pain medication." "I insist," I said, using the tone that had commanded respect in briefing rooms around the world. "I want Dr. Chen to explain exactly what you're giving me and why." Asterisk, Morrison hesitated, the syringe still in his hand. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to proceed. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "Actually," I continued, "let me ask you something, James. What exactly is in that syringe? Because I noticed you drew from 2 different vials." The silence in the room was deafening. My family sensed something was wrong but didn't understand what. Morrison stood frozen, caught between his mission and his conscience. That's when I played my final card. "You know, James, in my years of service, I've learned that when someone can't look you in the eye, when their hands are shaking, when they're deviating from normal procedures, they're usually about to do something they'll regret for the rest of their lives." Asterisk, Morrison broke. The syringe slipped from his trembling hands and crashed to the floor. The clear liquid inside mixed with blood-red medication, creating a puddle that looked exactly like what it was, a mixture of life and death. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. They have my daughter. They said they'd kill her if I didn't." That's when everything exploded into chaos. Security alarms started blaring. Armed guards rushed into the room. My family was hustled out for their safety, and Morrison collapsed into a chair, sobbing as he confessed to being part of a network that had been systematically targeting high-profile patients. Asterisk. But here's what really shook me to my core. Morrison wasn't the only one. As the investigation unfolded over the next several weeks, we discovered that Walter Reed had been infiltrated by a sophisticated criminal organization, one that specialized in medical assassinations. Dr. Chen wasn't just nervous, she was the coordinator. She identified targets, studied their medical conditions, and planned the perfect ways to eliminate them while making it look like natural complications. Morrison was just one of several nurses who had been recruited through blackmail, threats, or financial desperation. Asterisk, the network had a simple but terrifying business model: wealthy clients, foreign governments, criminal organizations, corrupt politicians, would pay millions to have specific individuals eliminated in ways that couldn't be traced. A heart attack during surgery, an allergic reaction to medication, an infection that suddenly turned deadly. All explained away as tragic but natural medical complications. Over the next month, as federal investigators dug deeper, they uncovered evidence of at least 17 successful assassinations over the past 3 years. 17 people who had died in what appeared to be medical complications, but were actually carefully orchestrated murders. Asterisk, judges who were investigating corruption cases, journalists who were getting too close to dangerous stories, business leaders who were threatening to expose criminal activities, military officers like myself who had access to sensitive information. All eliminated by people they trusted with their lives. The sophistication of the operation was staggering. They had developed protocols for every type of medical facility. They knew how to recruit staff. Through a combination of financial incentives and personal threats, they had created medication combinations that would be nearly impossible to detect in routine autopsies. But perhaps most chilling was how they selected their targets. The network had access to medical records, insurance databases, even hospital admission schedules. They knew when high-value targets would be vulnerable, when they'd be isolated from their normal security, when they'd be dependent on medical staff for their survival. Morrison's confession led to a cascade of arrests. Dr. Chen was found in her car, dead from an apparent suicide, though investigators suspect she was silenced before she could reveal more about the network's leadership. 3 other nurses at Walter Reed were arrested, along with a pharmacist who had been providing access to controlled substances. Asterisk, but the investigation revealed Something even more disturbing, Walter Reed wasn't the only facility that had been compromised. The network had operatives in major hospitals across the country. Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Mass General. Nowhere was safe. Think about that for a moment. Every time someone important, someone threatening to powerful interests, needed medical care, they were potentially walking into a trap. The very people sworn to first do no harm had been turned into instruments of murder. Asterisk, the financial trail led investigators to discover payments totaling over $50 million over 3 years. Money flowing from offshore accounts, shell companies, criminal organizations, to medical professionals who had betrayed every oath they'd ever taken. But here's where the story gets even darker. The investigation revealed that this network had been operating for over a decade. They had perfected their methods through trial and error, learning from each successful assassination how to make the next one even more undetectable. Asterisk, I learned about Dr. Marcus Webb, a cardiologist in Houston who had been recruited 5 years earlier. Webb had gambling debts that made him vulnerable. The network paid off his debts in exchange for access to his high-profile cardiac patients. Over 3 years, Webb facilitated the deaths of 11 people, including 2 federal judges and a prominent attorney general from Texas. The method was always the same. During cardiac procedures, Webb would introduce air bubbles into the bloodstream or use medications that would cause immediate cardiac arrest. The deaths always appeared to be complications from existing heart conditions. Families grieved, never suspecting their loved ones had been murdered by the man they trusted to save them. Asterisk, then there was the case of Nurse Patricia Williams at Johns Hopkins. Williams had lost her son in a car accident, was struggling with grief and financial problems. The network approached her with an offer she felt she couldn't refuse: $100,000 for each intervention she performed. Williams specialized in pediatric care, which made her particularly valuable to the network. She was responsible for the deaths of 3 children, whose parents had been targeted. The children weren't the intended victims. They were leveraged at the network, killed them to send messages to their parents: stop your investigations, drop your lawsuits, or more family members will suffer tragic medical complications. Asterisk, the psychological profiles the network used to recruit medical staff were sophisticated beyond anything I'd seen in military intelligence. They identified individuals with specific vulnerabilities: financial stress, family threats, ideological motivations, professional dissatisfaction. They didn't just bribe people, they psychologically broke them down until compliance seemed like the only option. Dr. Richard Torres, an emergency room physician in Miami, was recruited after his daughter was kidnapped. The network held her for 72 hours before releasing her with a message. Dr. Torres now worked for them. Over the next 2 years, Torres was responsible for ensuring that certain patients who arrived in his emergency room never left alive. Asterisk, the sophistication of their operations extended to their intelligence gathering. They had access to medical records through corrupt hospital administrators. They monitored insurance claims to identify high-value targets. They even had people placed in law enforcement agencies who would tip them off when someone was getting too close to exposing criminal activities. I discovered that my own case was part of a larger operation. The network had identified 12 high-ranking military and government officials who possessed information that could damage their operations. I was number 7 on their list. Numbers 1 through 6 had already died in what appeared to be natural causes or medical complications. Asterisk, Admiral James Richardson, former Chief of Naval Operations, had died 6 months earlier from what was ruled a massive stroke during routine surgery. Representative Karen Williams, who had been investigating defense contractor fraud, died from an allergic reaction to anesthesia during a minor procedure. Senator Michael Davies, who was preparing to expose corruption in military procurement, died from a heart attack while recovering from gallbladder surgery. Each death had been perfectly orchestrated. The medical explanations were plausible. The families had no reason to suspect foul play. The investigations that these individuals had been pursuing simply died with them. Their work left unfinished. Their evidence buried with their bodies. Asterisk. The network's financial structure was as sophisticated as their operational methods. Payments flowed through a complex web of offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transactions, and legitimate-seeming consulting companies. The money trail was so convoluted that even the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit struggled to trace it back to its sources. But what truly horrified me was learning about their expansion plans. Internal documents recovered from Dr. Chen's office revealed that the network was planning to franchise their operations internationally. They were preparing training materials for medical assassination networks in Europe, Asia, and South America. The documents detailed recruitment strategies specific to different countries' healthcare systems than countries with socialized medicine. They focused on recruiting through ideological manipulation. In countries with private healthcare, they used financial incentives. In countries with authoritarian governments, they worked directly with state security services. They had already established preliminary operations in 6 countries. A cardiac surgeon in London who had eliminated 3 prominent critics of the pharmaceutical industry. Neurologist in Tokyo who had caused the deaths of 2 politicians investigating organized crime. Anesthesiologist in São Paulo who had killed a journalist and an environmental activist. The network wasn't just a criminal organization, it was becoming a global franchise for medical murder. They were creating an international infrastructure that would allow them to eliminate targets anywhere in the world, in any medical facility, with methods that would never be detected. During Morrison's interrogation, he revealed details about the recruitment process that still give me nightmares. The network didn't just approach medical professionals randomly, they studied them for months, sometimes years. They knew about personal relationships, financial situations, psychological vulnerabilities, professional frustrations. They would create situations that made recruitment seem logical, even necessary. They might arrange for a doctor to accumulate gambling debts. Then offer to help. They might threaten a nurse's family, then position themselves as protectors. They might appeal to a technician's political beliefs, convincing them that certain patients deserve to die for the greater good. The psychological manipulation was so sophisticated that many of the medical professionals they recruited genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. They weren't just committing murder for money, they had been convinced that they were serving a higher purpose, eliminating people who threatened social order or progress. Morrison himself had been recruited through a combination of financial pressure and family threats. His daughter had been diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that required expensive treatment not covered by insurance. The network offered to pay for her treatment in exchange for his cooperation. When he hesitated, they arranged for his daughter to be briefly kidnapped, sending a clear message about what would happen if he refused. The training materials recovered from the network's operations were like nothing I'd ever seen. They had developed detailed protocols for every type of medical facility, every type of patient, every type of elimination method. They had contingency plans for different scenarios, backup methods if primary approaches failed, and cleanup procedures to eliminate evidence. They even had psychological support systems for their recruited medical staff, counselors who helped them deal with guilt, rationalize their actions, and maintain their cover. The network understood that committing murder, even for money or under threat, would take a psychological toll on medical professionals who had trained to save lives. The investigation revealed that the network had been beta testing new elimination methods. Using homeless patients and elderly individuals without family, these victims were chosen specifically because their deaths wouldn't be investigated thoroughly. They became guinea pigs for perfecting techniques that would later be used on high-profile targets. One particularly disturbing document outlined their research into medication interactions that could cause delayed deaths. They were developing methods that would allow them to administer substances during one hospital visit that would cause fatal complications days or weeks later, making the connection between the medical intervention and the death virtually impossible to establish. The scope of their research was staggering. They had partnerships with pharmaceutical companies that provided them with experimental drugs. They had connections with medical device manufacturers who helped them develop equipment modifications. They even had relationships with funeral homes and crematoriums to ensure that evidence would be destroyed before it could be analyzed. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of their operation was their record-keeping. They maintained detailed files on every elimination, every recruited professional, every target they were monitoring. They treated murder like a business, with performance metrics, quality control measures, and customer satisfaction surveys. The network's clients were a who's who of criminal organizations, corrupt politicians, and unethical corporations. They had eliminated union leaders for mining companies, environmental activists for chemical manufacturers, judges for organized crime families, and journalists for human trafficking networks. Asterisk each client paid differently based on the target's profile and the required method. A simple medication overdose might cost $500,000. A complex elimination that had to appear as a surgical complication could cost $2 million. High-profile targets with extensive security required fees of $5 million or more. The financial records showed that the network had generated over $200 million in revenue over the past decade. They were one of the most successful criminal enterprises in American history, and their success came from exploiting the trust we place in medical professionals. Asterisk as I recovered under armed guard, I spent countless hours studying the investigation files. I needed to understand not just how they had targeted me, but how they had managed to operate for so long without detection. The answers were as disturbing as they were enlightening. The network succeeded because they exploited our assumptions about medical care. We assume that doctors want to heal, that nurses care about their patients, that hospitals are safe spaces. These assumptions made us blind to the possibility that medical professionals could be turned into assassins. Asterisk. They also succeeded because medical deaths are rarely investigated as crimes. When someone dies in a hospital, especially someone who was already sick or injured, the default assumption is that medical complications caused the death. Families grieve and move on. Insurance companies pay claims. Law enforcement moves on to more obvious crimes. The network had studied the medical examiner system and knew exactly how to make deaths appear natural. They understood which medications would be detected in autopsies and which wouldn't. They knew how to time their interventions to coincide with existing medical conditions. They had turned the entire healthcare system into their weapon. Asterisk today. As I share this story, I know that there are still network operatives out there. The investigation caught some of them, but not all. There are still medical professionals and hospitals around the country who have been recruited, who are waiting for their next assignment, who see patients as potential targets rather than people to heal. The new security protocols being implemented in major hospitals are a step in the right direction, but they're not enough. The real defense against networks like this is awareness. Patients need to be more vigilant. Families need to ask more questions. Medical professionals need to report suspicious behavior among their colleagues. Asterisk. Most importantly, we need to understand that the trust we place in medical professionals, while generally well-deserved, cannot be absolute. The white coat and stethoscope are symbols of healing, but they can also be perfect disguises for those who would do harm. My experience changed me fundamentally. I no longer take anything for granted when it comes to medical care. I verify everything. I ask questions about medications, procedures, and staff. I trust ... but I also verify. A principle that served me well in military intelligence and now serves me in protecting my own life. Asterisk. The network tried to kill me with kindness, with professional competence, with the very trust I placed in them to heal me. They almost succeeded, but military training, suspicious timing, and a willingness to ask difficult questions saved my life. They came for me with a syringe and a smile. Next time, they might come for you, but now you know what to look for. Now you know the questions to ask. Now you know that even in the places we go to heal, danger can wear scrubs and carry a stethoscope. Stay vigilant. Your life might depend on it. Asterisk. If this story opened your eyes to a threat you never knew existed, if it made you think differently about hospital visits, if it reminded you that vigilance can save lives, ... hit that like button below, and drop a comment telling me, have you ever felt something was off during a medical visit? Have you ever questioned a doctor or nurse's behavior? Have you ever asked for a second opinion when something didn't feel right? Your experiences could help others stay safe. Share your story in the comments, and make sure to subscribe, because there are more stories like this, more hidden threats, more truths that powerful people don't want you to know. The next story I tell could save your life or the life of someone you love. Until next time, ... stay alert, stay alive.